You're listening to the Better for America podcast, presented by Amac, the Association of Mature American Citizens.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber, and this is your Amac podcast, Better for America. Folks, I'm very happy to have with me today Robert Bobby Charles. He's Amac's spokesman. He writes extensively and contributes a great amount of material on our website and also through the Amac News app. So if you haven't yet downloaded the Amac News app, what I love about our news app is that we're not bombarding anyone with ads, which is really, you don't hear about that in these days. We don't take any information, not even an email address. So very easy. You can download the app on the phone. We're up over 20,000 people have registered to receive news. And a lot of that news is coming from Bobby Charles. Bobby has worked in national justice and criminal justice for over 30 years. So he brings with him a tremendous background. And I'm going to talk to Bobby a little bit about critical race theory. I want to just say this, folks. The reason why AMAC formed, one of the major reasons why we formed was really to preserve the Christian Judeo values that our wonderful, amazing nation was really formed on. And I've recently read the 1776 report. If anybody has not yet read that report, I highly, highly recommend that you take the time and that you read it. It is just so well thought out. And we see that our founding fathers, that those people that had a vision for a beautiful future for America, understood that there were some inalienable rights that come from a creator. And those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, I know so many people are rattled when they hear about critical race theory, the language that we're hearing coming out of the left. And so we're going to talk to Bobby a little bit. Bobby, you've written persuasively of what lies behind critical race theory, and you've explained why it is wrong. And why confusing so-called equity, right, which is a Marxist term, with equality. These are two very, very different words. They mean different things. And we want to try to inform people so that they can understand why it's dangerous when we hear the left talking about equity over equality. So, Bobby, can you expand a little bit on these ideas and shed some light for us?
Absolutely, Rebecca. And what a great topic. I mean, I think people at the outset need to trust their instincts. You know, a lot of us who are members of AMAC and are part, I like to think of the AMAC generation. We learned civics in school, and sometimes you think, well, what I must have learned must have either been wrong or is outdated or needs to be changed. And the answer is no, actually. What you learned was probably just about dead on and right and remains right today, because there are values that are timeless. So what is this critical race theory business? And I think this is important because people need to speak up in their school board meetings. They need to speak up in their communities, and they need to know what to say. First thing I'll do is say, go to the amac.us site and read the entire article because it gives you all the data points so that you can understand why critical race theory is wrong. But here's the bottom line. Marx came up with this idea now 150 plus years ago that was attempted to be implemented now many times by socialists and communists. And the idea basically is that there are immutable classes, that there's a proletariat at the bottom and that there are very privileged bourgeoisie at the top, and that these don't change. Of course, America is the living counterexample to this, because the reason people get rich in America is that when you have low taxes and hard work and a little luck, you do better. And the hard work piece counts a lot. And people get to keep most of their income. And that's the beauty of America. That's why America grew from being a backwoods nothing to being the largest and greatest superpower in the world, economically, militarily, and from, I would like to say, from a moral justice point of view. In fact, that's why 200 constitutions around the world are simply mimics, really, of our Constitution. So what is this critical race theory business? What they've done is Marx said these classes are going to need to divide on each other and war on each other until the proletariat can create a dictatorship for the proletariat, the lowest class, and they can rule, of course, with an elite special group of communist leaders that'll help them rule and get all the benefits that the proletariat doesn't get. But in any event, that's the plan. Well, if you replace the idea of economic class with racial class, if you divide America, I mean, we can be divided a thousand different ways. We can divide ourselves by tall and short, or north and south, or skinny and fat, or balding and not. You can find 110 ways to divide us, right? So race is what they've picked because it's salient. It's an opportunity right now to basically use the back door, bring Marxism in, and have a redistribution of the wealth from all those people that have worked hard, of any race, of any class, of any identifier that you'd like to use, and redistribute that wealth through a powerful central government to another class. And this is where, Rebecca, we get to this idea of equity versus equality. Very, very tricky proposition. What they're doing is they're using this word equity, and they're saying, well, you know, it begins with EQ, so you probably have to be in favor of it, right? Because you favor equality and equal opportunity and equal protection under the law. And well, actually, those equal protection under the law, equal equality by virtue of the implementation of that idea are embedded in our Fifth Amendment and our 14th Amendment. And the idea that you mentioned earlier, that God-given rights apply, those inalienable rights, that opportunity for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that applies to every American that is an American. And that's the beauty, the absolute beauty of America. Equity is different. Equity says, and this is their definition, and the Antifa folks and some of the Black Lives Matter leaders, they are avowed Marxists. Equity says that there are immutable, unchangeable groups, and we're going to use race as our distinguishing feature here, and that these groups basically need to be brought even in outcome, and that a powerful federal government or centralized government, in the case of the Soviet Union, the Soviet government, or Venezuela, of course, that's really worked out well. They both worked out well. They will bring these groups up to equality, up to equity with each other. But that's the whole point, is that, number one, we are not a we are not a country made up of groups. We are a country made up of individuals. And number two, the point is equality of opportunity, not equity guaranteeing equal outcomes. So what their mission is when they say equity is their mission is to take all of the resources they can get their hands on, I guess out of police, out of everything you can get their hands on, out of those who've worked hard, and put those resources in the hands of those that will be dependent. They happen to use race right now as the basis, but dependent on a all-powerful federal government. And the question I would ask listeners is does that sound like America? Is America equality of opportunity for the individual with the maximum liberty possible? Or is America some sort of an equity-centered, group-oriented country that basically divides you by your demographic, and then tries to equalize the demographics through a powerful communist government? So that's not us. That's not America.
That's right.
So I urge people to look very hard. Critical race theory is just a delegitimization of America.
It really is. And so, Bobby, I started out by explaining to folks that there was a reason why Dan Weber formed AMAC. The idea, I believe he came up with the idea in early 2006, and we formed in 2007. And the reason why he wanted to form this organization was that he saw a change in American culture that he thought was dangerous. What do I mean by that? When he attended my high school graduation, for example, I was the fourth of 5 of his children. My 3 older siblings, each of them, there was either a pastor or a priest. There was multiple faiths were represented, and a prayer was shared among those graduates. And when I graduated high school, the school said we're doing away with that. And when my father said, well, why? Leadership at the school said, well, there were some parents that were complaining, and, we don't want to make this a religious thing type of thing. My father thought that was quite strange and odd, but we saw so many things that he noticed. He had great foresight, and he thought to himself, we're moving away from the vision that our founding fathers had for America. And that was a government that's small, that is governed by the people. And so when I hear of the word equity and equality in the news everywhere you turn, and racism and racist and all of these words that we're hearing, what I'm seeing is in a group of oppressed and a group of oppressors, or at least it seems that that's the way the far left, is trying to lay things out. That there are people who are extremely privileged and have too much unfairly, and there are people who have been mistreated for so long. And this is the core problem with America. And I want to remind people, if you go to that 1776 report, the vision that our founding fathers had for this nation was really about, stated in our declaration, is all men are created equal. Now, does it mean that our country has been perfect or without flaw? Of course not. But their vision and their understanding was that all men and women and people are created equal. And that was the vision that they had for our country. And I believe that these founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, Adams, you name it, Washington, of course, and later down the line, Abraham Lincoln, these were good men. Very good men. And it really bothers me deeply as a mother and a grandmother now to hear people defame those people who helped to make the country the greatest nation on earth. So just so that people understand, when you hear the word equity, it's not the way we always thought of. Everyone believes, I think most average people would believe that it's right to equal rights should be afforded to all Americans. But there's no guarantee of outcome. And that's where your individual grit and your determination and your abilities, your gifts, your talents all come into play. And that's what determines where you're going to end up in life. And I think that that's what makes for a great free nation. And, it's so I just want to encourage people, if you haven't renewed your AMAC membership, you really ought to do it, because when we go to Washington and we talk about the issues, when we talk about, getting government out of our schools, or at least leaving it up to the states, and when we talk about ways to protect all of the rights that we hold so near and dear, we need more members. We need more than 2.4 million members. AARP is now at 30 million members, so we've got to catch up to them. Bobby, this is such a tough time too in the nation. We're seeing not just people divided, the Republicans, the Democrats, and so forth, but we're seeing how people are taking different sides as it relates to things that are happening overseas, things that are happening in Israel. And we spoke a little bit last week. It's moving quickly. A lot has happened. I want to talk first about, Trump. We saw that Trump secured peaceful agreements between four countries and Israel. That was Egypt, Jordan, Bahrain, the UAE, and progression with Oman, Sudan, and Saudi. And Trump built peace around an unshakable commitment to Israel. And now, by contrast, what do we see? I mean, Iran is the object of Biden's affections, it seems, and Israel is trashed along with the Jewish faith by members of the Democrat Party. These are American people. These are our representatives. These are members of the Democrat Party that are literally trashing Israel and the Jewish faith. Those people are AOC, Tlaib, and all of the Democrat leaders who do not vigorously disavow anti-Semitism. And I believe, Bobby, that this is exactly what is further dividing Americans, putting Jewish Americans at risk, and walking back our longstanding commitment to Israel. So, in my opinion, that must stop. But I'd like to get into this a little bit for those people who may have friends that disagree. Can you give us some background, Bobby, a little bit of history? You did a fabulous piece on our website outlining this. But for those listening today, give us some background and take us to where we are today and a little perspective why the Biden administration is walking back on our commitment.
So let me nest our discussion of Israel in a confirmation of what you just said about the founding fathers, and say that, in my opinion, and I think most people in their heart of hearts would understand this if they think about it for a moment as we approach Memorial Day, every American has more in common with every other American than they have with anyone else in the world. And the point here is that America has become what it has become because of a virtuous cycle, not a vicious cycle where we attack and divide, but a virtuous cycle where we reinforce and take risks and lift each other up when we fail so that we can become better. And now, within that nested sort of context, let's look at Israel. The way that Trump, and it wasn't just Trump, I will tell you a little story about working in the Reagan White House, but the way that Trump looked at the world and the way that most Americans look at the world is that peace is a good thing and that the Middle East is a fraught place. It goes back thousands of years being fraught with conflict, tribal conflict, religious conflict, and that the way Trump thought about it and the way that Reagan thought about it was that if you, and other presidents, Republican and Democrat, is that if you reinforce the virtuous, if you say there's one democracy over there in the Middle East in 22 countries, and it's Israel, and the United States has long supported the idea that rule of law is vital, democracy, a degree of liberty, the idea of a free society, that if we're going to radiate outward that idea, if we're going to empower people of every country in the Middle East, frankly, the world, we need to be consistent in our support of our allies, and in particular, the support of our allies that are champions of liberty and of a constitutional government and of free vote and the way that Israel runs. Now, Israel is under a constant sort of Damocles. They have countries around the region sworn to their destruction. But the way that Reagan and Trump and frankly others, I think historically have looked at Israel is that we see that you can center like a magnet, you can center the shards of the region around a magnet. And they said Israel is the right magnet because if you create these bilateral accords, eventually you have peace across the region. The Biden administration seems to think that it's much more important to center over here on Iran. And because Iran is a potential nuclear threat, they're a state sponsor of terrorism. You can either confront them with an Israel-centered policy, or you can indulge them with the idea of this nuclear accord, which really just gives them permission to create nuclear weapons over time. And so what we really are looking at here is a fundamental difference in the way that you look at the Middle East. And why does it matter? It matters, of course, for everybody over there, but it also matters back here in the United States. And it matters because we, again, are a people, you said it at the beginning of this program, we are a people that are equal in God's eyes. We are a people who, it doesn't matter what your ethnic background is, it doesn't matter anything about you. In America, you are accorded by law, and if we do it right, in reality, you are accorded all of the rights of your fellow neighbor. And that doesn't matter whether you're Jewish, whether you come from an Arabic background, it doesn't matter. The problem we've got right now is you have an administration that is indulging, and the Democratic Party seems to be indulging the idea that you can attack your neighbor, that you can criticize your neighbor for their ethnic background. You can criticize your neighbor because they are affiliated with a particular country in the world. And then, of course, what we've seen in the last few days, actually, is a spike in anti-Semitic violence against Jewish Americans. That is absolutely inadmissible. It's not right for Republicans. It's not right for Democrats. It's not right for anyone. We are a country that we are either, to borrow from Patrick Henry, we either hang together or we hang separately, right? We're either going to be one country where we believe in each other, support each other, recognize that our differences are our strength, not our weakness. Or we're going to end up being divided by all of those forces, whether they're in the Arab world or they're Chinese or they're Russian. They decide they're going to divide us. And I think we got to be smarter than that, Rebecca. We have to say, we are who we are. We know who we are. We respect our neighbors, and our neighbors respect us because we believe in these ideals.
Yeah, I think that a lot of folks are not paying close attention, and the sound bites that they're hearing on the news, and this is maybe for a lot of younger people, I do look to listen to, the generation of our folks in their 20s and 30s to say, hey, what do you think about this? Or what are you hearing on this? And what I'm hearing is that Israel is being sort of described as a tyrant, killing civilians without cause. Can you explain to people that have that vision of Israel just
Yes.
bombing civilians, why that is really not true, and
Right.
why they're being painted in such a light.
Right. So this most recent conflict, and again, we could spend an entire day, probably an entire semester, on Israel and the Arab world. But the bottom line is that Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, took over the Gaza Strip in 2007, and Hamas and Fatah are the Palestinian groups. Fatah. Again, they're different, but the bottom line is that Hamas dropped, I think I've seen estimates from 1,800 to 4,000 rockets in on Israel because of a conflict in East Jerusalem. Again, not to get too deep into it, but there's a long-standing dispute over both violence and access to land in that immediate area. So the bottom line is they use this opportunity. And where does Hamas get their direction? Hamas gets their direction from Iran, largely. Their material and a lot of their, basically the actions they take. And so does Hezbollah, which is another terrorist group supported by Iran that attacked Israel from Lebanon, and elsewhere. So the bottom line is that Israel is put in a position where it's surrounded. It needs to respond. So you can respond by saying, which there are times when Israel has done this, and I go back to the Reagan era and even the Carter era, when Israeli leaders and Arab leaders, including Palestinian leaders, tried to put olive branches out and create a lasting peace accord. Ronald Reagan worked very closely with Anwar Sadat, who was the president of Egypt, to try to bring the Palestinians and the Israelis together on one sheet of music. And there have been very good leaders on both sides that have tried to do that. 2 months after Sadat met with Reagan in July of 1981, October of 81, Sadat was assassinated by an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, again, a terrorist organization that thinks that the radical answer is to eliminate Israel. And of course, 2 years after that, terrorists hit the American peacekeepers in Lebanon and killed a number of our Marines who, again, were in a peacekeeping mode. So peace has been very elusive in the Middle East. Israel responds. One thing that everyone needs to know is Israel responds when they are attacked. And so I think it's, you can say chicken and egg, but let's not say chicken and egg. Let's say peace is the right outcome. But if any one party attacks another party, that other party will respond. And Israel, in this case, had to respond. Difference, by the way, is that the 4,000 missiles that were launched from Hamas, many of which were knocked down by the Iron Dome defensive missile system in Israel, they were launched at civilian areas, including in Jerusalem, and which Israel calls a red line. There was no warning. They were launched at civilians. The flip side of that is that Israel, despite responding aggressively to those terrorist acts, actually forewarned any location that the civilians would be in, including buildings where it looks like the terrorists had put civilian human shields and warned them to get out of those buildings, which is why when the building was destroyed that had Hamas operatives in it and it also had reporters in it, no one was killed. And the reason they weren't killed is because Israel gave advance warning they are going to be hitting that building because it's got communications operations pushing things. So
that
bottom line is,
I mean, we've got an Amac associate who is heading to Israel today, actually. He's got family there, and firsthand, he'll tell you, he said they give warning. They have it. There are warning sounds, bells, megaphones, people that do walkthroughs, and they've got drones that are able to detect any type of heat motion, that type of thing. And they're very careful to make sure that civilians are out of the way of danger. But of course, this is such a complicated issue. There's a tremendous amount of history here, and I here at AMAC, we always pray for peace. For more information, check out the article on our website. There are two of them, two that you've put out, Bobby. So just look for Robert Charles, and another. I think the title of the one article was "Everything You Need to Know About What's Happening in Israel." Two really great pieces. So I encourage people to check that out. But when I see what's happening here, Bobby, in America, and just how sad it is that Jewish Americans are it's just another group of people that were being divided against. And I think that Dr. Alveda King, I just saw her at the Council for National Policy. This is where William Barr spoke as well, and Newt Gingrich. We had some amazing speakers. And Dr. King, she said many, many times, there's one race, the human race, and we all bleed the same color red. And it's time that we remind our friends, our family, that we do, as you said, Bobby, we have more in common than we have differences. And this is going to start in our schools. We've got to push back on critical race theory because it's dangerous. It's dangerous for our young ones. They're talking about kindergarten right through 12th grade. We know that there's a handful of states that are simply saying, no way, no how. We will not allow this in our schools, and parents and grandparents ought to get involved. So I want to remind people, I've been talking about it, Bobby, and we have an article out. We're going to be doing holding a Sign the Pledge. And this will be a really fun way for people to get involved, to sign the pledge that you stand with AMAC and all of that which AMAC stands for. More of that coming to your inbox, so pay attention to that. This coming weekend, Bobby, I don't know if you've got any fun plans, but we've got the Memorial Weekend coming up. And I love this time of year. My personal favorite time of year is when all the flowers are blooming here on Long Island, and we look forward to a beautiful summer, hopefully a maskless summer, and that'll be behind us. But we're reminded, Bobby, how lucky we are because of the veterans who died for our freedom. There's a huge burden, right? And that their sacrifice, I think, imposes on us to remember, to pause, and to take time. So can you share with us a little bit about, you shared with me when you had walked through Arlington many times, and I just love to hear you tell that story.
Yeah, so you couldn't be more right. I also think this time of year is a time of great reflection and renewal, and Memorial Day reminds us that we have all these privileges because of those that died on battlefields around the world for the course of the duration of our country. And so I think part of what we're sort of asked to do is to look harder at ourselves and maybe imagine. And I do this. I walk through Arlington regularly because it's down in the Washington area. But, every cemetery in just about every town in America has veterans that there should be flags beside on Memorial Day beside their graves. And I think we're sort of asked to take time to not only remember them as individuals who sacrificed, but to remember, as you said, that what they did for a reason. That reason basically falls on us to live up to the aspirations that they gave everything for. There are times when I've walked through Arlington, and I have a number of relatives buried there, when, there was one time I was walking through Arlington, and I actually was thinking about a particular relative who was a brother of my grandmother's. She had two in World War II, and he was a very special person. He was a very special person, both for my family, my immediate family, and also for my mother. So I was thinking about his life, and I thought to myself, I wonder if he sees that I'm walking through this Arlington cemetery and headed for his gravestone. And I'm telling you, Rebecca, it was one of the most eerie experiences and most uplifting at the same time. I got to within about 30 feet of his stone, and the clouds opened, and there was a shaft of bright sunlight, and it illuminated his stone for about 30 seconds. And actually, I took a picture of it, and there's an article on it in one of the Amac magazines now about 2 or 3 years ago. But it was such a transcendent moment because I thought, yes, maybe he does see this, and maybe all of them, standing among those stones, you feel a sense of obligation. You realize that I'm very, very small, but my obligation is to be as big as I can be within my smallness, to live up to what they did for me. And as you know, I've interviewed a lot of veterans for the book Eagles and Evergreens, and those World War II vets are very, very special. So are Vietnam vets. So are all of our vets. And I think it's because they signed up to die for you and me.
You know, Bobby, it's beautiful, and that's so important. What I just want to pause there. They signed up to die for you and me because they loved and have an affinity to freedom. And another important reason, I hate to cut in your beautiful story here, but another important reason I've got to just emphasize is we don't want critical race theory. What part of that teaching is really at the core is that America is not, America is racist, and America is not the freedom-loving country that many of the vets that you're referring to believe that we were. And that's why they were willing to fight and die for us. So this is so, so important. And when you really think about that, we say, well, how many people that are, 20 years old, 21 years old today are going to sign up, essentially giving their lives to, saying the government, you own me and you tell me where to go and where to be and how to be and what to do, if they don't have a deep love for their nation. And so this is what's beautiful about our veterans is the love for their nation. And we want to keep that spirit alive in America. After all, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be doing this podcast. And we've got over a third of our members, Bobby, are veterans, as you've pointed out, and nearly 75% of AMAC members have a very close family member who has served in the military. So I'd love to hear a story or two. I love to hear that the light, shone on that stone, as I believe that was real.
I'm reminded of the adage that there are no atheists in foxholes. War is I've been in a few combat zones, and war is, I've never seen anything like what any of those vets saw. But that's why we put such a high effort behind peace, because war is so bad. But at the same time, we also have to understand that sometimes you have to go to war against evil, and that's what happened. That's what's happened throughout our history, is that we've stood for the right, and we have not without error, but we've stood for the right, and we've saved Europe twice, and we've done everything we can to live up to the ideals that involve helping others. So, a couple quick stories. World War II. Actually, so I recently was writing again a brief piece about. Actually, it will come out later this week. Recognizing Memorial Day, recognizing a particular World War II vet from my town. Who is no longer alive, but did an interview when he was here, and he was my English teacher, and he was also played Benjamin Franklin in the old play 1776, which is if you haven't seen that play, look it up online. It's a beautiful play written in the 60s and performed many times, including in a television performance later. But he played Benjamin Franklin in a local production, and I never knew until after he died. And I saw this interview, which was with one of his grandsons, that he was on D-Day. He was on Omaha Beach, what they call the Dog White Sector, on day one, within hours of the first boat hitting the shore. He was promoted to captain on the beach. When he saw Saving Private Ryan, which he didn't want to see, but one of his sons, he had 6 sons, said, "You really ought to see it." He said, the only thing he said was, "That's exactly, Hollywood usually gets it wrong, but that's exactly what it looked like." And bottom line was, I did more research into his past, and it turns out that he won the Bronze Star, the Silver Star, the Croix de Guerre, which is the highest French divisional award, with a Silver Star. Why? Because when he fought all the way from there to the bridge at Remagen, the last bridge that wasn't blown, that allowed us to get across the Rhine, the Battle of the Bulge, he was at the Ardennes. Go back for Memorial Day and watch the Band of Brothers series. It's a little tough to watch, but by God, you'll come away ready to walk through a wall after you see that series. And that's about World War II. It's about Easy Company. He wasn't in Easy Company, but he at the Ardennes, he has vivid descriptions of what happened there. That's Bastogne. That's where the Battle of the Bulge basically started. And what's interesting, his story is that just before the Battle of the Bulge started, he was asked something was wrong at the front lines. They were probing by the Germans, and we thought the Germans were in defeat. We thought they were in retreat, that they were done. And so his general officer said, get in a Jeep. There were 3 guys, get in a Jeep. 2 of them went west, 1 of them went east, and go see what you can find out. And he tells the story about coming up down a road, and all of a sudden there's a giant Tiger tank coming over the top, which was the first indication when they reported back that we were up against something really big. And it turns out that was Hitler's big counteroffensive. The only other story I'll tell you is that we often remember our World War II vets and we forget other vets. And I want to just remember for a moment the Vietnam era vets and every vet since. We owe so much. We could spend an entire program talking about vets. And of course, AMAC does an awful lot for vets intentionally. But I had another teacher, a history teacher, who was in the 101st Airborne. Didn't talk much about it when he was teaching history. But years later, I came back to him and said, his name was Dave, tell me a little about what you did. So his stories on the battlefront are extraordinary because he volunteered to go to Vietnam. His attitude was, like the World War II veterans, that he loved his country. He had always wanted to be a history teacher when he was in high school. And he said, look, history has dealt me the card that I was supposed to be dealt. I am supposed to go to war. This is something, not a gung-ho guy, just this was my mission, my obligation. And he served with the 101st Airborne over there. The last day of his service, a grenade came over the top of a hill and landed between he and another guy. He threw it, but it left an impression on him. But I asked him, what did you take away from all this? And he was, again, he's not a rah kind of guy. He's just loves his country. And he felt that it gave him an opportunity to do what he could do when he could do it. When he got back, there was no internet. And the 101st Airborne, the portions of the 101st that he was part of did not have any way to communicate with each other. So he set up a newsletter. And I said, so what came out of the newsletter? He said, well, it was great. Thousands of guys got to finally talk with each other and share their experiences. And it was really quite wonderful that they could do that. I said, did anything special come out of it? He said, well, yeah, always had surprises. I said, one day a guy called me named Jack. And no, a guy called me and said, I'm looking for a guy named Jack. And I said, Jack who? He said, I don't know, just Jack. And then he told this story. He said that during a firefight in Vietnam, and he knew all the names and places, a vet was stumbling across the open field and stumbled on a medic who was working on 4 guys. But he was really only working on 3 of them. He had left the 4th one to the side. And the guy that stumbled on him said, "What to the medic? What's going on with the 4th guy?" And he said, "He's gone. He's bled out. He's white. I can't. I got to try to save these other 3. He's gone." Well, the guy that had stumbled on the medic recognized that the 4th guy was a guy that he'd had beers with a couple of weeks earlier in another part of Vietnam. And he felt kind of terrible about that. So he said, "Is there nothing you can do for him?" He said, "If you can find a vein, I'll put plasma in him, but there's no veins to be found. He's bled out. He's completely white." So he looked in his neck and he looked in his armpits and he looked everywhere under his knees. He looked everywhere he could look for a vein, no vein. And he finally found a vein in the ankle. So as my history teacher said, well, he put some plasma in and fixed him up. So 40 years later, this was the guy who had been fixed up, looking for Jack, who had saved him.
Wow.
And Dave put the 2 together.
Isn't that something?
So that's the love of vets for vets. That's the love of vets for each other. That's the love of vets for America. And that's why on this Memorial Day, we just need to remember we're darn grateful. We should be darn grateful.
Oh, that's great. Bobby, thank you so much for that. That's a great way to wrap up today's podcast. I also want to remind people, if you haven't joined or renewed your AMAC membership, you really should do it. Here's why. You get a magazine. You get a bi-monthly magazine. Latest magazine sneak peek preview will be in your mailboxes right around the Memorial weekend or just shortly thereafter. We've got a great story in this magazine, Bobby. I'll just give those who are looking, who are watching. This here is my grandfather, and we did a nice piece on my grandfather, who would be, I believe, 105 or 107 years old. if he was still with us. And he fought in World War II and the Korean War. And he was First Lieutenant George Arthur Burkle in the 442nd Infantry Regiment. So there's a great piece there as well. Bobby, thank you so much for joining us today. And for all of you out there listening, this is your podcast, Amac's podcast, Better for America. We look forward to having you back with us here again next time. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Better for America podcast. To learn more about AMAC and all it has to offer, visit us at www.amac.us.